play dependence.
Yeah.
Restate the question.
Yeah, the question that's brought up is how do you teach self-reliance as opposed to dependence? And that brings to my mind several issues, really. The obvious is the self-reliance as opposed to dependence, and also brings up the idea of the difference between self-esteem and just feeling good about what a person or what they do. And what comes up for me, and I want to address those a couple of different ways, is the difference between feeling good about themselves based on what they do as opposed to who they are. I think there's a lot of confusion right now between what self-esteem is and what other esteem is. I think there's a lot of confusion in our school systems. I think that sometimes we think we teach self-esteem by patting a kid on the back and saying good job. I don't think that always teaches a kid self-esteem. I think sometimes that's other esteem as opposed to self-esteem. But let's talk about the self-reliance as opposed to dependency. I mentioned it at another time that I think a worthy goal in parenting, or a kind of a mission statement for parenting, is to teach a child to manage their own behavior. And I think one of the ways that we really do that is by facilitating a child making their own decisions from an early time in their childhood. I think we start when they're very little. I think we start with them being able to make some age-appropriate decisions of their own. It's a lot easier when a kid is little to just get them dressed our way. It takes a little bit of extra time to let them pick their shoes, for example. Or when they say, as they're 2, I can do it myself. And it takes 20 minutes instead of 1 minute to tie their shoes or something like that. It's hard as parents to take the extra time to let them try and stumble and fail sometimes, and then assist them as opposed to just do it for them. But with the idea of self-reliance in mind, we're going to save ourselves a lot of grief and a lot of years of struggle if we'll make that little investment in time with the idea that we're trying to teach them to manage their own behavior, and the idea that we're trying to teach them to be self-reliant as opposed to dependent. The more that we can help them do it on their own, with the idea of teaching them to manage their own behavior, the more that we're going to make an investment in self-reliance as opposed to dependence. So my response to the question right off the bat is, don't do for a child what they can do for themselves. Vygotsky was a guy that talked about the zone of proximal development. And what he talked about with that is trying to help a child push the envelope of their own development. He talked about helping them learn to do just a little bit more than what they're capable of with support from a parent, from a loving caregiver, so that they're able to do what they're able to do and just a little bit more with your support. So it's kind of a psychobabble term, but it's the idea of pushing them just a tiny bit, not too hard, not too far. And I get concerned about parents that push too much. We're so worried about teaching kids to read before they're born. And I don't think that's such a good idea. I think kids need to be kids. But I think we need to provide them with opportunities for growth and development that's just on the edge of their abilities, so that they're stimulated and challenged on their own. And I think that's what teaches that self-reliance. Let them do what they can do and don't do it for them. I think that's true when they're adolescents. When they come to us and say, do this for me, we need to be wise enough to say, I think you can figure that out. And let them. I think it's important for us as parents to be able to say, I think you can figure that one out. And let them. Don't solve problems for our kids that they can solve for themselves. If they really can't, okay. But if they can, let them. The self-esteem versus other esteem. I'd suggest to you, and Stephen Bavelik is a guy that talked about this a lot, the difference between praise for doing and praise for being. I think it's great to give a kid a pat on the back, give him a handshake, give him some extra allowance, whatever it takes, for a job well done. I think that's wonderful. I think our kids need all the recognition that we can give them. Have them know there's lots of recognition for things that they don't do well, and I think we need to give ample recognition for things that they do well. But I also think that it's important to give our kids recognition just for nothing. You ask yourselves, and maybe this is more for the women, but think about this. If your husbands or significant others show up with a dozen roses, what's the first thing that you think of? Most of the girls say, "What'd you do?" Or, "What are these for?" Or they go outside for the wrecked car or something like that. But why can't they just be because you are? But it's the same thing for the men. We just don't typically get a dozen roses. I do. My wife does that all the time for me. But it's, we have our equivalent of that. But you think about when something comes to you as a gift, the first thought that most of us have is, what are these for? Why do they have to be for anything? Why can't they just be for you? Are we human beings, or have we turned ourselves into human doings? And I'm afraid that in our society we've turned ourselves into human doings, and we do that with our kids. The only time that they get praise or a sense of their worth is when it's attached to something that they've done or something that they've produced. As men, we know very well that we are worth what we make. We tend to think that our worth is gauged by our paychecks, and I think that that's profoundly sad. And women have the same thing, a little different, attached to how they look or other things that determine their worth, and I think that that's devastatingly unfortunate, and it's pervasive in our society, and it goes clear down to early adolescence, even earlier than that with our children. And I think that we can staunch that early in a child's life by helping them understand that they have tremendous worth just because they are. Not because they do or not because they can accomplish, but just because they are. So if we can get accustomed to early in a child's life and giving them praise for being, along with praise for doing, then we can help them learn the difference between real self-esteem and other esteem. And I think it's very important that we do that in connection with that self-reliance as opposed to dependence and things like that. And they start to understand that they really have self-worth, that they can still feel good about themselves even if everybody in the room is telling them that they suck. There's a difference between somebody saying, "Wow, you're awesome," and feeling good about themselves, and still feeling good about themselves when nobody's telling them that they're awesome. And what we want is our kids to be able to feel good about themselves even if nobody's there telling them that they're great. That's self-esteem. Does that make sense?
That's